This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Shifting a little money here, a little there, hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance. They'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it. Guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Callie, I want to start on February 21st. Take me back to the White House. Maine's governor, Janet Mills, was there with a whole bunch of other governors meeting with President Trump. What brought her to Washington?
I believe she happened to be there that week for Governors Association conference.
Callie Ferguson is an investigative reporter for the Bangor Daily News.
All the governors were in Washington that week, meeting on various issues, and it just so happened that there was this debate in Maine, back in Maine, brewing that, erupted on Friday.
That Friday night in February, sitting in front of the governors, Trump started talking about an executive order he'd signed targeting transgender athletes playing school sports.
2 weeks ago, I signed an executive order banning men from playing in women's sports. Many Democrats are fighting me on that. I hope you continue.
All of a sudden, he's calling out Maine's governor, Janet Mills. And their exchange, it takes off.
But I understand Maine. Is Maine here, the governor of Maine? Well,
not here.
Are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way,
I remember watching this on Blue Sky when it was happening in real time. And in the moment, it all just seems so random. Like, why is he calling out the governor of Maine? Then I was watching more clips, and the reactions were along the lines of, wow, the governor of Maine is not backing down here. The president and the governor, they're getting into this back and forth that's, well, it's like you can hear Trump is maybe losing his temper. You could feel like he's holding back. But Governor Mills, she's not even mic'd up. She's just speaking very matter-of-factly. So while Trump has this bully pulpit,
so you better comply because otherwise you're not.
You hear her voice cut through.
See you in court.
Every state, good. I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one.
This exchange between Mills and Trump had been brewing in Maine for a week. A transgender pole vaulter in one of Maine's high schools had been targeted with a nasty Facebook post from a local lawmaker. And now, with Trump threatening funding cuts, it was national news.
And then, of course, this flurry of different investigations, at which point our newsroom was like, okay, I think that we may need to look deeper into what the implications are in Maine. We also, that week, my editor and I teamed up with ProPublica to take a much deeper look. So we had not just extra help among members of our newsroom to help cover the story, but help from two really talented reporters there as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it was Avengers Assemble. I mean, are you and your colleagues used to this much national attention?
No, not at all. We are a small state. We are a little over 1 million people. We don't make national news too often. So not only was this kind of an unprecedented reaction from the federal government, but it was, I don't know if unprecedented is the right word, but certainly an unusual response to something that Maine's done.
If Janet Mills saying "see you in court" was the starting gun of a race, how fast are people running here, and what's happened along the way?
Well, I'd say that we're sprinting. I'd also say that I figured we were gearing up for more of a marathon. Typically, what happened after that starting gun of an exchange between the two was that there was 3 different federal inquiries launched into Maine within about 36 hours. It's been a rapid-fire process that has caused a lot of heads to spin, certainly ours.
Today on the show, how the Trump administration is seeking to starve Maine into submission, and why Democratic-led states across the country have a lot riding on how this fight plays out. I'm Rob Gunther, sitting in for Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear the stories making news in Washington right now. Host Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs, takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors, including policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes and trade, inflation concerns, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise, or wherever you listen.
This episode is brought to you by Built. Built is perfect for those looking to earn airline miles and hotel points just by paying rent on time. There's no cost to join, and just by paying rent, you unlock flexible points that can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, a future rent payment, your next Lyft ride, and more. When you pay rent through Built, you unlock 2 powerful benefits. First, you earn one of the industry's most valuable points on rent every month. Second, you gain access to exclusive neighborhood benefits in your city. Built's neighborhood benefits are things like extra points on dining out, complimentary post-workout shakes, free mats or towels at your favorite fitness studios, and unique experiences that only Built members can access. And when you're ready to travel, Built points can be converted to your favorite miles and hotel points around the world, meaning your rent can literally take you places. Start paying rent through Built and take advantage of your neighborhood benefits by going to joinbuilt.com/whatnext. That's joinbilt.com/whatnext. Make sure to use joinbuilt.com/whatnext to sign up for Built today.
This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. Shopping at Saks is a great way to discover the best new styles and elevate your everyday look, especially when you're short on time. The great thing about Saks.com is that it is always open 24 hours a day, which means you can browse from the comfort of your own home. Saks makes it really easy to find your favorite brands, and they offer amazing style inspiration. I'm not exaggerating when I say my jaw dropped at the shearling leather biker jacket I found, and that's not even mentioning the Alice and Olivia sequined mini dress I had my eye on. Whether you're refreshing your entire wardrobe or shopping for a vacation, Saks makes it fun and easy. So if you're looking for a fun, effortless shopping experience and you want to elevate your personal style, head on over to Saks. That's Saks.com for everyday inspiration.
Callie, Governor Janet Mills, she's having this national moment. See You in Court has become this resistance rallying cry. We're seeing it on T-shirts at protests. But it's clear from your reporting that she's really not a progressive firebrand. Can you give me a brief biography of her career?
Sure. Janet Mills comes from a well-known political family in Maine. Her dad was the U.S. attorney. Her sister has served in state government. Her brother has been a lawmaker, a Republican lawmaker.
Yeah, she comes from a Republican family, right?
For the most part, yeah. Janet Mills has spent most of her career in the law as well as politics. She was the first elected female district attorney. She was our first female attorney general. And of course, she's our first female governor. She is considered a sort of law and order Democrat. You know, I think that given her career as a prosecutor, she hasn't necessarily embraced a ton of progressive issues in that regard, but she's been, more liberal on issues and policies that affect Maine families, on economic issues. For the most part, I think she reflects the politically purple identity of the state as a moderate.
Yeah, I was reading through her bio. It really seems like she carved out this niche for herself, being very strong on gun rights because it is such a divided state politically, but then also sort of getting the larger population to back her by promising to expand Medicaid, which her Republican predecessor was dead set against, right?
Correct. In fact, the morning after she was elected governor in 2018, she was in court the next day for a legal proceeding in which a judge was trying to allow the state to comply with Medicaid expansion, which voters had passed, but her predecessor, Governor Paige, had refused to comply with.
Yeah, I think this biography is so important to point out because you have a politician carving an independent path that's not necessarily wedded in the culture wars that we're seeing on the national stage. But then Governor Mills is sort of thrust into the middle of one of the most culturally wedge issues of our time, right? This issue about transgender athletes and their ability to play sports in school.
Totally, totally. And for the most part, she's stayed out of that actual debate. She's been asked about it. And when she's been asked about this, she has mostly spoken to wanting to defend her state against the Trump administration's attempts to bully it into violating its own laws, and has left any kind of discussion of whether or not trans kids should play in scholastic sports to our state lawmakers.
And what does the state law say?
Maine has an anti-discrimination law that protects gender identity. It's called the Maine Human Rights Act. And so the governing body that oversees scholastic sports sets the policies for who can play. And they've cited that law as the reason why transgender girls are allowed to play in the leagues that reflect their gender identity.
So you basically have Trump at the White House telling her to unilaterally change the law. And she's basically just like, I can't do that.
Exactly. He's telling her to violate it, is what she said. And, as someone who spent their career in law, that is exactly how you get under her skin. She said on Monday, she went on MSNBC in which she addressed this entire controversy for the first time at length. And she said what I sort of suspected all along, which was it was his comment that I am the federal law that really provoked her during that exchange at the White House.
I've always had respect for the rule of law, and that just boggled my mind to say that I am the law. Every fifth grade civics student knows that there are three branches of government, and that the chief executive is required by the Constitution to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, not to make the laws, not to invent the laws or reinterpret the laws by tweet or Instagram post or press release or executive order. He's not allowed to do that. So
it sounds like you're setting up a picture here of the Maine electorate as politically independent. You're setting up this picture of Governor Mills as politically independent, but there are still firebrand partisan lawmakers in your state. And I'm thinking of how this particular controversy started, as many outrages do. It started on Facebook. You have this Republican state lawmaker, Laurel Libby. Can you talk about what she did and how quickly that controversy erupted?
So Laurel Libby had, even before this, had been known as a ultra-conservative lawmaker from Auburn, Maine, which is a city next to Lewiston, Maine's second largest. And on a Monday in mid-February, she posted a photo of a transgender athlete from a town in southern Maine on Facebook because she had won a girls pole vaulting competition. And specifically, this girl had previously competed in a boys division, and she posted a photo of that student back before she had transitioned and started competing with other girls. By the end of the week, she had gone on several right-wing TV shows, and in Maine, there was a brewing sense of outrage on both sides of the political spectrum. Those who agreed with Libby thought it was totally unfair that this girl had been allowed to compete and win a competition against other girls. And there were others who were just alarmed that a lawmaker would drag a previously, basically a normal kid into this incredibly divisive and heated debate about whether transgender girls should compete in sports, and specifically to post her photo on the internet. And of course, she refused to take it down.
How did the community react? I imagine there was a national news presence that wasn't there before. Were faculty, students, families rallying around the student?
I know that, the community where this student attends school, Cumberland, there was a rally to support this student and other students a few weeks ago. There was a sense that Maine wouldn't be bullied to change its laws, especially in ways that, put at risk the well-being of a 16-year-old. I think she's 16. From what we've heard from the local lawmakers who represent Cumberland and the towns around it, there was a real embrace that went around the student, including by her competitors. Of course, not everyone feels the same way about whether transgender girls should compete in sports, but I think in general, there's been a real bristling against the way in which the Trump administration has tried to, force the state into obedience with its view of the issue.
Yeah, and notably, your state's legislature also took a position on this controversy, right?
Right. While Maine is a politically purple state, Democrats control both chambers of the House as well as the governor's mansion. And a week after Representative Libby made this Facebook post and refused to take it down, the Democratic Speaker of the House and the Democrats in the House voted to censure her, which essentially stripped her of her voting and speaking rights. In another unprecedented move out of all this, she since filed a federal lawsuit to regain those speaking rights. So that's still pending in court.
President Trump asked Governor Mills to violate state law. That state law, Maine's 2021 Human Rights Act. Is it clear that politicians in the legislature are going to try to keep this law? Are they going to try to change it? What's the temperature check?
So far, the Democrats who control the House have signaled that they don't intend to change it. The deadline that the Trump administration imposed for Maine to change its policies or face a lawsuit was last Friday, and they didn't. There's at least one bill pending in the Maine legislature that would seek to reverse this policy, at which point it's unclear if this entire assault on Maine's funding would be moot. However, it still remains to be seen exactly how that plays out. The session won't end for another couple of weeks.
We'll be back after a quick break.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states and situations.
There's a good chance you're dealing with a middleman, like me, when you get your medicines. That's because PBMs and insurers are often the same company. We even own big chain pharmacies and are buying your doctor's office. We decide what medicines you can get, where you get them, and how much you pay. It's a win-win. For me.
When middlemen own it all, you lose. Visit phrma.org/middlemen to learn more. Paid for by Pharma.
The Trump administration's response to the February 21st White House meeting was swift, extensive, and brutal. I asked Callie to tell me about the 6 different federal agencies that launched investigations after Governor Mills said she'd see Trump in court.
The U.S. Department of Education has targeted the Maine Department of Education, as well as the governing body that oversees school sports in Maine, which is called the Maine Principals Association, and the local school district where the pole vaulter attends with what's called the compliance review for Title IX. The U.S. Department of Education also later opened a second inquiry into Maine's policy that allows school districts to keep confidential students when they want to go by a different gender at school, saying that it would violate federal privacy laws. The U.S. Department of Agriculture opened an investigation into the University of Maine system, into their policies around transgender athletes. It should be said that Maine has 0 collegiate transgender athletes. The USDA also froze federal funding to Maine late last month, which throws about $3 million of nutrition funding over this entire spat. The U.S. Department of Commerce, which oversees NOAA, froze funding to a marine research grant. The Social Security Administration at one point canceled a contract with our state health department that allowed babies to be registered for Social Security at the hospital, and then quickly reversed that after it received immediate blowback. Let's see. Oh, and the U.S. Health and Human Services Department also launched an investigation into Maine over its Title IX policies and has referred its findings to the Justice Department. And of course, the Justice Department has threatened to sue Maine if it doesn't reverse its policy. I think that's all 6.
It just seems to me that, you said there are 0 collegiate transgender athletes competing right now in Maine. There are only a handful of students competing at the high school level. And yet the Trump administration is throwing the book at Maine. It's kind of like, I imagine if the Trump administration were to accuse somebody of jaywalking in Bangor and they decide to launch a nuclear missile at the entire state. How are people reacting?
I think a lot of people have felt like this has been entirely disproportionate. The jaywalking example, I think, is apt, but it also implies that transgender girls who are playing sports is violating the law, maybe, which of course is not true in Maine. So I think that people haven't necessarily reacted well to the fact that the federal government is trying to tell Maine what to do. Of course, there are some people who think that Maine's policy is wrong, and it's good that they're facing pressure that would change a policy that they believe is unfair. But I think most people are just really, really surprised not only to have been thrust into the national spotlight like this, but that it's been so searing that this really small number of kids playing sports has unleashed this massive reaction that has targeted not just federal education spending, but really unrelated issues, things that have nothing to do with transgender sports.
Well, tell me about other Maine politicians, because my understanding is that Susan Collins, one of your senators, got involved to try to mitigate some of the punishment. And on the other hand, I'm also seeing a Democrat, your state's representative, Jared Golden, trying to also cross the aisle in a weird way. How are other politicians getting involved here?
Our congressional delegation hasn't been uniform in its response to this. So Jared Golden, as you mentioned, he sort of split the difference here. He said that he believes that Maine's policy on trans athletes should be revisited. However, this is not the way to do it, that he criticized that, the Trump administration's essentially assault on Maine in all aspects of its life, but urged lawmakers to change the policy. Collins has sort of come out in response to all this as saying that she believes also that the Maine's policy should change. She, I think typically hasn't critiqued the Trump administration in particularly fiery terms at all, but has sort of responded to all this, I think, by trying to field the fallout. She spoke with the Social Security Administration about its decision to cut contracts that would change the state's policy that allows babies to be registered at hospitals. However, she told us, she told the press that, she was assured that this was a mistake, but it later came out in reporting that the acting administrator of Social Security, in fact, did reverse the policy because he was angry at Mills's back and forth with Trump. He called her a petulant child that needed to be punished.
Last week on Friday, a federal judge ordered a preliminary win for Maine and unfroze a lot of this funding. What happened?
This was a decision that related to the Department of Agriculture's decision to freeze funds to Maine that, according to court filings, would have affected programs that feed children in schools. A judge ruled that the Trump administration had to unfreeze that funding. As a reporter who thinks of herself as having followed this really closely, there are just so many different back and forths between the federal government and the state. I thought it was really interesting that when the U.S. Department of Agriculture investigated the University of Maine system over its trans athlete policy, that it froze funding before it actually reached a finding, and then was forced a day later to reverse its decision about freezing that funding. And then that same agency, a few weeks later, froze a different pot of funding. So it's just been chaotic. And I mean, the first finding and the first determination that Maine was in violation came from the U.S. Health and Human Services Department, which reached that finding in a single business day.
Which it usually takes like 6 months to a year, right? You said?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
We're seeing the shock and awe play out at the federal level with cuts to federal agencies and mass firings. We're seeing the judges try to catch up and issue rulings on whether or not this is illegal. And it seems to me like Maine is a microcosm of what's going on, and it's happening in front of the national media. But a lot of the stuff you're telling me, I don't know if that's necessarily coming through, that all these funds are being canceled. And even if they eventually get restored by a judge, I imagine there's a lot of damage that's done by having those funds withheld in the moment.
Sure. A lawyer that we interviewed for all of this said that, even if it turns out that none of this is legal, or a lot of it isn't legal, that you can still wreck a lot in the process. Right now, the bigger shoes are starting to drop, right? So last Friday was the deadline for Maine to change its policies, allowing trans girls to compete in sports, or lose its federal education funding. And Maine did not change its policies. And on Friday, the federal government initiated the process of removing the state's federal education funding. So that's only just starting to happen. And up until then, we really hadn't lost funding quite yet, but for that NOAA grant and, briefly the nutrition funds for kids from the USDA. So now I think we're all waiting to see what happens next. Losing that funding will go through to administrative hearings, but if we do lose it, the state of Maine could sue to get it back. The Trump administration could also sue Maine just to change its trans athlete policies if the state continues to refuse to do so, or, doesn't revisit the issue at the legislature.
Which it promises you, right, through the Justice Department?
Yes, exactly.
I was taken by a part of your reporting for ProPublica, and it said that Maine is a test case for other Democratic-led states. What are the bigger national stakes involved here?
I think that it's hard to think of another state that's faced the barrage of different investigations and inquiries and assaults on funding that Maine has had. But I think that, the administration is trying to sort of crush the state as hard as possible as a warning to other states that, if you tangle with us, if you stand up to us, we won't be afraid to come after you regardless of what your laws are, regardless of whether or not it follows typical protocols for conducting these kinds of investigations, regardless of whether or not our actions even target issues related to the central conflict here. Maine, on the other hand, and what we've heard from state lawmakers, from parents, from like the governor herself even, is that we feel all eyes on us, and that what we do, that people are kind of looking to us in some ways to see how we respond to that pressure.
Callie Ferguson, thank you so much for your time. I'm really grateful you shared your reporting with us.
Sure. Thanks so much for your interest and for having me.
Callie Ferguson is an investigative reporter for the Bangor Daily News. And that's the show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Anna Phillips, Ethan Oberman, and Madeline Ducharme. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Rob Gunther, sitting in for Mary Harris. You can find me on Blue Sky. I'm at OneRobGunther. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.